take that recording off of there.
Oh, sorry.
I think
Oh,
this is serious.
This could be
Oh.
used by the government, Steve. Watch out.
Well,
Yeah.
wait, so Paul and Steve, I don't have to record this. Would you prefer for me to not record this?
It depends. Do we make a lot of money out of it when you sell all the DVDs or the, the wax cylinders?
DVDs.
Ah,
Yes. Well, I can unrecord it. I don't have a problem doing that. It's up to you guys.
Royalties divided by 11. That'd be perfect for Christmas.
yeah.
That's
Sounds
right.
like a bluegrass band.
Yeah.
Whoa, sorry. No.
All right. Well, it's 7:06. Mike, should we get started?
yes.
All right. So today is the November the 17th, and the Monroe Mandolin Camp gathering, the monthly gathering with very special guests all the way from the future. I'm really enjoying saying that. Paul Duff, who's in Perth area, Palmyra. Are you at 9 in the morning? 9 a.m.?
We are, yes. we
9
are.
a.m. and then Joe Steve Gilchrist from Melbourne area and Lake Noatak is, I believe, at 12 noon. Is that
Yep.
correct?
Yep.
Perfect.
We just
Oh,
had
welcome.
morning coffee.
Oh, nice.
Hmm.
Nice.
Yeah, but it's interesting
Oh,
to
can't wait.
mention that both of these extinguished gentlemen have espresso machines at home.
Doesn't everybody?
Of course. Me?
Steve, what's happening?
How do you play mandolin without espresso?
Exactly.
Slowly.
It's in the
Yeah.
tremolo.
Yeah.
And you
Gotta
can have
espresso yourself.
you can have an espresso machine, which can be very expensive and still not make a good cup of coffee.
That's very
Yeah.
true.
We
That's
know
how-
that. But they both are expert coffee makers as well. Mike, do you want to do a little bit of introduction, or do you want to be MC and lead it off, or just want to turn it over to the guys?
Do we have more intro than that you had written down there? Does
I did not.
Does everybody know who these people are?
Well, why don't you give them a blow by blow play? And Paul was waiting for some specific jokes too.
Oh,
A blow by blow.
Yes.
Well, let's see. I've known both of these guys for a long time, and they have been very, very good friends and very generous with their time and energy to bluegrass, certainly, and have been a great help to me. I don't think at this point I could be where I am if it had not been for the both of them. So,
Wow.
I'm certainly indebted more than I can say. I've known Steve the longest. I guess we'll just go chronologically. Met in 77, I believe.
79.
79, was it? Really? I bought strictly by accident the first Gilchrist mandolin that was sold in the U.S. It was an F5 that I bought for $1,000. And
What?
yeah, he's having a sale now, $1,000, 1979 prices. Get them while they last.
that was US dollars too.
Yeah.
Venmo.
Steve looked like Sasquatch at that point in time, and and a full
What do you
full
mean?
hair and a big beard, and was working for George Gruen, who is looking more like Sasquatch every day. I think I met Paul in at the Gray Eagle Tavern in Asheville in 2005, something
Yes.
like that.
Yeah, you were playing with David Long.
Playing with David Long, and
I met David in the toilets. Nothing suspicious. Just he looked aside and said, "Are you Paul Duff?" And I said, "Well, I'm being propositioned by someone in a Nashville toilet, but that's okay. It's an experience."
yeah, I was gonna say he didn't ask you to shake his hand, did he?
No.
He does some in
Some
between.
dignity.
Yeah. Okay.
Toilet jokes already?
Yeah. Well, we might as well just go straight for it.
I got all this script stuff to get through.
Okay. Well, so I've known you guys for a long time. I guess Steve had booked the first trip that I took to Australia, and as a sponsor, and Paul has booked the last several. So they have indirectly bought us a lot of groceries and shoes and strings, and bought my kids clothes and all manner of things. There's Alec. He's here.
And wine and whiskey.
And whiskey, which I have a fifth of whiskey from Albany that still has not been opened and is waiting for your arrival.
Forward to it.
I'm curious, Mr. Gilchrist, you were originally a surfboard carver, were you not?
Yeah. Wasn't everybody?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know about Paul. What made you go from surfboards to mandolins?
Canoes. I made a couple of canoes when I was a young kid. I lived on the river here, and I just loved the water, which led to the beach, which led to surfing, which led to make my own surfboard.
Oh.
So it's just a surfing culture. I guess south of Perth, where Paul is, it's a big surfing culture too.
Yeah, even on the even in Perth, it is. It's coastal.
Yeah, the good thing about that culture it was at a time where everything was going commercial and mass produced, but it was at a time where the surfing culture was kind of, and I guess a lot of the hippie culture was kind of do it yourself, make it real, and try and work out how things were done when things were done well. And surfboards was the same thing. So there were a lot of people making small little companies starting up making surfboards, which is great for a teenager to get into, because it really develops hand skills and just design skills that just sort of really progressed that really quickly for me. Just the confidence with making things. So when you get into playing music, I just found myself naturally attracted to the instrument of how it was put together because of making surfboards, I guess, or just an art sort of background to begin with, drawing and painting and just making things. And that really fostered it, and everybody was really supportive. Oh, you make surfboards? Oh, cool. You make me one. Same thing happened starting to make instruments. Oh, you make mandolins? Oh, cool. You make me one. Yeah, it was just a reaction to the way things were going, which were kind of, in my opinion, downhill quality-wise in every direction compared to the way they used to be made. I guess Paul had the same experience, not necessarily with mandolins, but just that whole.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned canoes, because I made canoes as well, and some of them floated. Some of them floated.
How do they sound?
It was even better, and some of them unfortunately floated until you got out to the deep bit of the river, and then they didn't float. But you learnt to swim. It's sort of like living in Australia. It's quite astonishing to hear of people who don't know how to swim. I always found that quite amazing that that people could. It's just you grow up on the coast here and you do things in the water. You muck around in the water. You do a bit of surfing. You make some canoes as a kid, and we had space. I think a lot of folks in the States had this situation where there's space to run around and mess around and make things and make cubbies and go into the bush and that kind of stuff, or even big backyards. It was good that way. So you sort of messed around with things and just did it. But if you wanted to fix something up, you did it. I don't know if it's the same now, though, Steve. Do you think it's a similar kind of thing now, or has it changed a bit?
Oh, kids these days.
Kids.
I tell you what, though.
I'm still a young buck myself, so it's very hard to tell what the adults think.
What I find interesting, though, is a lot of the inspiration I got as a kid was through American television.
Oh, yeah.
Which was probably via Hollywood, which was promoting this idea of America, the outdoors America, which was what I loved. Canoeing, surfing, you know, it all came from there. Really, it didn't come from England, whereas most of our culture did. But when we started getting television, what America was projecting of itself was the strong, rugged outdoors type, which really appealed to a country kid down here. Ironically, it's kind of a symbiosis thing, but it was a lot of it came from there, and it still does. I'm still so attracted to America, the culture, the music culture, the geography is amazing.
Got everything.
Yeah.
You mean you're not strung out
Australia is really similar in that respect as well. Well, we think ourselves as the rugged outback type, but most people live in cities. And
was it about 80% or something?
Yeah.
Live around the coast in the city.
Yeah.
Right away.
I'm surprised you weren't strung out on Skippy the Bushhanger.
Another hour.
Well, we used to watch that, and we used to watch, Dennis the Menace and all those things. Because it was just a mix.
Yeah, I really I feel very sorry. My beautiful wife Maria is from Kentucky, and she had the misfortune of growing up, and she knew about playing classical music, and she's a wonderful musician, and but the poor lass cannot recite any of the lyrics to I Dream of Jeannie. She can't remember the tune of Get Smart. She knows nothing about Gigantor or the Time Tunnel. Everything that we grew up with, we knew more about America from TV sitcoms. Well, that image of America, all of those things are embedded into a lot of my generation's minds. We can often sing those tunes and recite the lyrics to television programs that were on at that time. So we did get a lot from that, about American culture from television, that's for sure.
Yeah. Green Acres is the
place to be. Yeah. But they were fabulously written. I mean, just amazingly well written. Get Smart, still, I just laugh my head off at Get Smart all the time.
Was it when did the both of you start building instruments, and what was it? I mean, Paul, you were a school teacher for a while, right?
Yep. Well, it was an interesting. It was a non-binary situation, Mike, because the year that I started teaching school was the year that I found bluegrass music. I walked into a pub in Fremantle and there was a bluegrass band there. It was my last year at Teachers College, I think. And I just couldn't, I'd grown up in a house that had music. My brother was a great guitar player, and there was a lot of music around in the house, but I'd never sort of been inspired to want to play any of it. And I at 19 years old, went into this pub in Fremantle, Clancy's. Mike, you've been there?
Yeah.
And saw a bluegrass band, and I just walked out of there thinking, I've got to play that music. I totally fell in love with it. And same for Steve. Once you start wanting to play the music, then you get interested in the instruments. But that year after, I started teaching. So I started my career of teaching with the thought in my head that I really wanted to dump this and try and build instruments and make a living. So I taught for 22 years and built instruments as a pastime and wanting to build up and build up, and then gradually went more and more part-time over the last 10 years of that teaching, and then got more orders, and it was difficult. I was sort of teaching about 0.5 half-time teaching, and supposedly building half-time as well, but you know, it's really like 0.75, and that doesn't make up one human, 2.75. So I decided eventually to really put more effort focused on the instrument building, and never regretted it once, especially around about just after Australia Day in January, when you get the depression of having to start another school year.
after the holidays.
Yes.
What mandolins in particular for the both of you? What is it? Steve, I have heard that you wanted to play mandolin but couldn't afford one, so you decided to build one.
Yeah. Same with the surfboard. It's the same thing. I didn't have any money as a kid.
So
But it's a similar thing with Paul. I mean, there was music around me. My grandmother was a great harmonica player, the old vamping harmonica in a cup, and my mother would sing all the old hymns all the time. And so when I started playing music, it was the same thing. I was really attracted to the acoustic music. I always go to the record store and look out whatever had fiddles, mandolins, guitars, and I'd buy it. Which led me to the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, the Triple Circle album at the time, and then which led to all these names of all these people that I went and searched out, which was fantastic. But the one that was missing that I knew about but wasn't on that album was Bill Monroe. So I went just searched out him, because everybody was saying, well, that's really where it came from. So when I saw that, I think it was, I forget which album it was. It's one with him playing, really up close of him playing his mandolin. And once I saw that image of that instrument and then put that together with the sound of the music that I was listening to, Norman Blake and Tut Taylor at the time, I had them sound in my head, but I could actually then see what the instrument was. And it was just, wow, I make surfboards. I can make one of them.
Cut that out.
Yeah. But it was really no information. Like now it's just, you're just flooded with so much information. Back then there was no information, which kind of made you really hungry for any little.
I was just going to say that excitement.
Information. Yeah. So you learn to research really, really thoroughly, and then Roger Simonoff's book course came out about the same time, or a little bit later maybe. So yeah, when it was just coming, you couldn't afford a mandolin, so what there was available was just absolute trash down here. It was just nothing here at all. You couldn't even go into a shop. Like for Steve, the same thing. You couldn't go into a shop and say, well, what does a Lloyd Law or an old Gibson or even a new Gibson look like? Because you either had the Ibanez F5s were around, those 70s ones, which were probably better than the Gibsons. Well, they were better at the Gibsons at the time. But that's about as high end as you could get without, being incredibly wealthy and going to the States and finding yourself an F5. You could get maybe A models, all sorts of things like that, but you couldn't get F models. Yeah, and you didn't have the luxury of like going to a music store, like you said, like in the States. They may not have a Lloyd Law, but they certainly have an A model Gibson, an old Teens A model on the wall, which are great, beautiful mandolins. That's a great starting point to get into mandolins, but we didn't have that. So everything was kind of, the attraction was to the US for that. I knew all the instruments were over there. I knew the people of my generation who were trying to do the same thing. They were all over there. The materials were over there. There's no spruce or maple, doesn't grow down here. We can only get, at the time I could only get wood in through violin suppliers who would bring in specialist violin wood from Germany.
Steve, do you remember a long time ago when this crazy young fella rang you up and said, would you mind if I just came by and showed you a mandolin that I built? And you were looking like Grizzly Adams at the time, was fabulous look. You said, oh, no, I know what you must have gone through. You said, well, okay, you know, that'll be all right. And I got on a bus with a friend of mine and went across Australia to visit Steve, because Steve doesn't know this, but he's always been my mentor without really realizing it. And just sort of that getting someone's opinion about is this right, or what does it look like, the right angle and stuff. And you were very generous with your time. But one of the amazing things that you did was that you brought out a blanket and put it on the floor and proceeded to lay out a couple of Lloyd Laws and several other mandolins that you were working on at the time, a couple of repairs and stuff like that. And I just was gobsmacked. And just having that image of that, just to sort of see in person, that reference of, you know, people often say, well, you get all these pictures, but it's not, you know, is it the right weight? Does it smell right? Does it, you know, why is that, you know, to look at it and go, oh, that's what that business was about. But the adventure of doing that, I mean, that's, you know, 3 days in a bus across the Nullarbor is not the most exciting thing you've ever done in your life. But the adventure of going there, and Steve, the other thing that was really exciting at the time was to go to Lamberti Brothers.
Yeah.
And they actually had maple and spruce in this small walk-in room, and we're just like, wow, this is maple and spruce, you know, for instruments and stuff. And that was really, really exciting. And I think that excitement is a wonderful thing. You know, nothing is laid out. It's not easy to get. And still to this day, I find it really exciting going and hunting for wood, you know, going and say, oh, this is, you know, this is an amazing place, or look at that. And every time, even when I've been to places before, you might go there and there's something leaning on the wall, you know, over near the buzzer, and you go, what's that? And I might go, oh, that's some old, you know, sugar maple that's been there for 12 years. And I don't think you want it. And you look at it and it's the most amazing wood that you've ever seen. And it's just so exciting. And you discover just absolutely beautiful material, which, as you said, Steve, for us is, I just love working with that wood. We don't have it here. You know, it gives and gives and gives. When you come to sand it, it looks beautiful. When you put some color on it, it looks just gorgeous. And when you put varnish on the color, it's even better. We don't have a variety of wood like that offers it up. So that adventure is I still think it's a wonderful. You know, I was speaking to a friend who was a builder, and he was telling me about some wood that he got from a fella in Missouri. And I said, oh, it's great stuff out there. And he said, it was all right. I said, did you go out and pick it? And he said, oh, no, I rang him and he sent me a couple of backs. And they were all right. You know, they weren't spectacular. I said, well, you didn't go and pick it? And he said, no, and he was about 4 hours drive away, I think it was.
Too far. Too far away.
Too far away. And I told him, I said, well, I've flown halfway around the planet and I drove 7.5 hours from Lexington, Kentucky. And that's, I think, a little bit of that effort that you put in. I think suppliers appreciate that. But what you discover on the floor of their barn or leaning up against the wall is you just get some fabulous finds. And it pays off in the end.
Yeah, well, that's part of the whole excitement of building instruments is the source of where the materials come from. Like Paul said, very generous, by the way, Paul. Your journey to Warrnambool was like my journey to Nashville at the same time. For the same
My journey
reason.
took longer than your journey to Nashville.
Yeah. But I got George full Monty. He was just one.
Well, what's the favorite part of your job, and what's the least favorite?
Me?
Both of you.
Well, initially for me, it's the selecting of the wood. Like Paul said, going right to the source, going through hundreds of pieces of wood, high grading off at the source, right there, high grading off the best sounding bit of wood. And when I do that, I can visualize the instrument from that bit of wood. That's really exciting. To me, that's the whole picture happens right at that time. Then it's up to me to pull it off. But the wood has the potential in it, and you can see it straight away as soon as you find it. You know, getting it something sent in the mail is nice, but being there and selecting through hundreds of pieces of wood and just tapping each one and getting the most lively one. So I can tap through 100, select 10 of the most lively.
It's the context, isn't it? It's all that context that you're in when you're selecting the wood.
It's all about comparing apples and oranges, A and B, A and being each one right beside each all the time. That's really, to me, that's really exciting. It's because it's all potential. I can make the best instrument in the world with this. Well, you can if you got the materials. The materials have that potential in them, but it's up to you then to fulfill that potential. That's just inherent in that timber. So, and then the other thing is when you string it up, when you first put the string on, that first string that goes on gives you a real indication instantly of how responsive it's going to be, or how responsive it is initially, and that's really exciting. When I hear that little feedback loop from that first string, I know this instrument's going to be right. You know, it's going to be the potential is there for it to fully open up, full throttle, which is really exciting. And then when you see somebody like Mike, performing them in context, where they're meant to be played and how they're meant to be played, that is really exciting to me. I mean, from the forest, there's all this huge journey in between that and the performer, but they're the two ends of the whole thing, the bookends that hold everything up. It's just the most exciting thing for me. Because
you hear the character come into, the character of individual players and the potential they get out of your instruments is the real joy of it. And that you just, because you can never, I can never bring out that potential in my own playing, but to hear someone who's a wonderful player just really bring so much out of the instrument that you've created is a really inspiring thing. Makes you want to do it again. And it's sort of humbling in a way. You think, oh, that's just, there's so much keeps coming out, and the variety. And having people who comment how much they love their instrument and how intimate they are with their instrument, I find a really beautiful, nothing necessarily to, they love it for a reason, of course, but the fact that they love it so much is an incredibly moving. I find that very humbling every time someone comments like that, because I know what it's like to get intimate with an instrument. So I understand what they're saying, and for them to comment like that about an instrument you've created is it was a beautiful feeling. It's really nice.
What do you think? What's the one thing that you'd like to improve on?
Me?
Both of you.
Everything.
Okay.
It's it's sort of like quite interesting because people say, well, there's so much you've learned and this sort of stuff. To me, there's got to be really something wrong with you if you've done something for 40 years and you haven't learned something. There's something really wrong, you know. So, but what I started to years back is work out that your eye becomes so attuned to things. Your eye and your ear, you know, for you, Mike, your ear is incredibly attuned to things that you can hear in each instrument, and you've got your eye attuned as a builder too to particular things. You can look at a scroll and go, there's something not right there, and then when you may perhaps go and measure something, it's not the way you want it to be. So being attuned to it is something that's really, you know, over the amount of years and stuff like that, that's something. But each part of it, there's like half a dozen careers, you know. There's French polishing, it's just so hard, and there's carving, there's coloring, there's pearl cutting, there's all sorts of these careers. So there's a lot that's hard.
Yeah, it's exactly right. There are so many different disciplines involved that you've got to keep trying to improve all the time. From just basic tool making, basic pattern making, all the way up to, you know, your carving and your mitering. And I'd like to improve all the finish. Really takes it out of me. I mean,
yeah, it is exhausting.
Trying to get the maximum depth and beauty out of that potential in that spruce and maple it's so easy to destroy it. There's a certain liveliness and a life you got to keep and magnify, and it's a real struggle. It's so easy just to spray a sunburst on. It's a lot harder to do it by hand, and then all the layers of varnish on top of it that sort of acts as a lens and has all light reaction to it that I find really, really fun to do. But it's just, it's always like you're just battling against yourself all the time to maximize what's potentially in there.
And you don't dare ever say, I think I'm getting a hang of this, because that's exactly when it turns around and kicks you in the ass.
Yeah, when the instrument lets you, it gets it right. you get it right. And so, because there are a lot of, I think of it as pictures. Like the back is a picture frame, the side round of there is a picture frame. That's a picture frame. That's a picture frame there. The top. They're all little frames that are framed by the bindings, and getting them all working together, and the light all working together, and the wood direction, getting your cut of the wood direction all, you know, so it dances with the light. You know, it's just, it can drive you crazy, but that's a real artistic sort of challenge all the time.
The more attuned your eye becomes, the more mistakes I see.
Yeah.
That's right.
And the worse your eyes become, the more you have to.
So how many different processes are there in building instruments like you build? So how many separate steps?
I'll have to write them all down. Hang on. Well, there's initial carving, there's initial side bending, the initial assembly of the sides into a rim. And these are all, of course, broken down into mini micro processes, which are a lot. There's the basic carving of shaping, machining and shaping of the neck. There's the headstock veneer with all the inlays on them. There's the fitting of the neck to the rim assembly. Then there's a fitting of the plates together, closing up the box, which is kind of no return point. So all those mini processes of the plate carving have to be right before that happens. So there's lots of micro processes in between all that. And then of course there's the wood, the water, the staining of the wood, and then a third of the job to me is really the whole varnishing process. That is one process, but it goes on for about 3 months, and it's full of these micro processes involved with it, breaking it down. So you can pull
That's
each
scary
part.
because you're just at that point where, you know, you've gone an entire, I don't know how long, Steve, to get this particular look with the building of it and mess up the finish, and you've destroyed what you've tried to create.
Yeah, it's worthless after that. And each stage, the more it gets more refined and assembled, the more the net gets pulled away from underneath you. So each process increasingly becomes critical, because the amount of work involved in pulling that apart and re-knitting that back together becomes it just increases all the time. So you just slowly just becoming more and more cautious with your processes as you get closer to the end, because what it means, a mistake means more and more all the time as you get close to the end. As far as
even the setup when you're stringing up, you know, the final elements of, you know, the string height of the nut, the playability, all that element. You've got, you know, gluing billets before you even get to carving, you know, hand planing the billets to get the seams perfect, all that sort of stuff. There, you can break it, you can keep breaking it down till it's hundreds of processes, or you can group them into major ones, I suppose.
So when you both play mandolins, I mean, how much does your ability to play and the style that you like to play affect what you build?
I think it's interesting that sometimes there's been a little trend, and Steve, you had your first visit to WA, I think, with one of these. It was a little festival, Mike, you were there, called Playmakers, and it was a great little idea, and it's been done, you know, it's kept going, and it was this thing. Okay, people who build instruments and play them. Well, I just find it dumbfounding that someone who's building an instrument may not perhaps play it. I have a friend here, Rad, who is a guitar builder, and he doesn't play. He can play a chord or play some notes on that. But to me, it's a crucial element, because just in terms of the feel of the neck profile and how it fits in my hand, the tonal qualities that I think are important, or that are important for the customer, of course, or a particular sound, all of that experience to me would come from playing and getting that. So, you know, the most obvious one is playability. You know, if I'm playing it and it's very, very uncomfortable, or there's something really wrong, I'm going to adjust it, whether it be tonally, whether it be structurally. So I think it's, I suppose it's not essential. I suppose there are lots of builders who don't. They may perhaps get someone in to play the instrument. But to me, as you go along in each of the processes, just having that in the back of your mind, you know, where you want the foundation, tonal foundation of the instrument to be, that you perhaps like, or that you understand is something either with a law type leaning to the sound or something different, is really important. And you get that from, to me, you get that from playing. I mean, I fell in love with this instrument because I fell in love with the music. So I suppose, you know, that's just something I've got my mind on all the time.
Steve?
Yeah, I started playing the mandolin before I started building them. So it was always about playing them. That was the reason for building, was to get a mandolin. So, but to me, the more I could play, the better I could play, the more I could really critique what I was doing, without relying on somebody else to be ruthlessly honest with you about the instrument. So, because people want to be nice.
Well, yeah, I hear you're pretty ruthless with your own. You have to watch if the bandsaw is plugged in or not. You get the little leg that you don't like, and it just goes ying right through the bandsaw.
Yeah, you better watch it. You better sound good. But that's something I think is a real benefit. You know, it's obviously fun to play music, but to be able to really, really know what the instrument's doing and not doing, and where you can improve your work from your own playing as a player point of view, which is your customer's point of view, the person who's going to end up with the instrument. Now, seeing it from their point of view is a real asset, I think, because there are a couple of things happening with the sound. There's the sound of the instrument that you hear out front, which is, you know, nice. But what you don't get from that is the critical thing that a musician has, which is the feedback, the responsiveness of actually playing the instrument. That to me is a huge thing that it's not often understood properly, except musicians know it. As soon as they pick up the instrument or put it down, they know that's what it's all about, is how easy it is to get the response back, how little you have to play, how hard, how little you don't have to play it hard to get the response, and you have a lot more throttle if you need it. That responsiveness, building that into an instrument, being able to detect that yourself as a player and a builder is critical, I think, to getting a really good, reliable instrument that's just going to keep developing and developing. Having that responsiveness feedback yourself that a musician just longs for in an instrument is really important.
What do you
It
think?
helps to be your own worst critic.
Yeah.
What do you think your greatest accomplishment or most satisfying accomplishment so far and has been as a builder?
I have it written out here. My highest achievement is to make instruments for Michael Curtis Compton.
Let me give you my address.
That's what I've got written down.
Seriously.
Achievement is
Could be builder or that you've been able to buy a house by a lake, or it could be
I built the house. I didn't buy it.
You had a team of builders come in. I saw that.
settle down.
The greatest achievement, satisfaction is having a life of making instruments. For me, I mean, that's the only job I've ever had, and it wasn't easy in the beginning. It was really difficult for a long time, but to have my whole career just making mandolins I'm so grateful of that. It's just incredible to think, because I tried a job when I was a kid. I've been working in a factory in Melbourne for 2 weeks, and I ran screaming out of the place. I was just, what? People do this for a living for their whole life? And I wanted to make instruments, and I just threw myself into it. But I'm so grateful that was possible, and that's only really possible from the American market, really. The music in America, the number of people who are just so steeped in the music and so knowledgeable, and that musical culture means that that's possible. For this really narrow category of instrument, it all comes from the music in America and the history of the music there. I'm just so grateful of that, of being able to have my whole life just making mandolins. It's just a crazy idea, but it's just wonderful.
Paul?
It's interesting that last comment, Steve, because from the very first instrument I made, which was for myself, and then after that when I thought, gee, this would be fun to do, or I'd really, really intrigued in it, I only ever thought about building them and sending them to the States. And I don't know why I thought that was incredibly inexperienced, but I did know that no one knew anything about what I was trying to do in this country. It's true, I couldn't even find an instrument that I wanted, and one of the things that sort of became apparent was no matter how hard I worked and how much I tried to get my instruments to look like a Lloyd Law and all those subtleties that you learn along the way, even at that early stage, I thought, no one here is going to understand why I'm doing it this particular way, or why I might be searching for this color, or trying to learn to use varnish and that kind of stuff. All of those little things that you have to think about, no one here was interested in it. And more importantly, no one here was going to spend the money on buying one of my instruments. There may have been a few people I knew who I picked with, but generally they didn't sort of get it in those early days. That's changed totally now. There's especially with young musicians around Australia, you know, thanks to the internet, thanks to them flying and getting into bluegrass and doing that sort of you know, that trip to Mecca to see where bluegrass came from and to listen to American bands and to really embrace the culture. They've come back to Australia knowing exactly what the real deal is and knowing what they want. And I think I'm finding more and more young guys who, you know, whereas a young apprentice would get his trade and go out and spend a lot of money on a ute with a lot of tools, I've had several young fellas saying, well, this is what I'm going to do with my life. This is the tool for my trade, and I'm not going to muck around with, you know, beginner instruments. I want to go right here, and I want you to get you to build one, which is, you know, a huge honor. But it's interesting that that has changed, and it was the same with bluegrass music. There weren't any bluegrass festivals and stuff around. There were some pickers, but people didn't have an understanding of those little subtleties that you were trying to do in our sort of quest to follow this law idea. But you know me, Mike, I'm in it, you know, I play bluegrass music and build instruments because I'm in it for the money.
Yeah.
You know, the money and the fame.
Well, you build, you seem to build like several batches a year with smaller numbers, and Steve builds one big batch. Why is that? Am I just not paying attention and have all that completely wrong, or is that?
Well, one of the things that I did walk away absolutely shocked when I first met Steve those many years ago was how many batches and how many instruments a year. I think, Steve, at that time you did look at me with a serious look and go, I'm never going to build that many in a year again. I think it was something like, you said 42 or something like that. And at that stage, I think I built 5. And it was just the most dumbfounding amount of work. I think you have to find a balance for how you build and the way that works for you. And I know, Steve, you've moved to that single batch a year, I think is what you're doing now, but you weren't always like that, and situations change. And for me, I was thinking, well, the way I build and what works for me, you know, 3 batches a year, it took a little while to work out of how many of each, and it settled at 4 in terms of how tired my hands are and my arms and stuff like that, and what works for me with attention span in terms of not being so tired that I'm starting to lose detail and not keep the quality up, and what's enough to satisfy me in terms of the amount of instruments that I'm producing. So
mostly mandolins, some guitars, but mostly mandolins.
The guitar thing has started to increase. I don't know that. My rough theory of it is that I think word might be getting around the archtop guitar world that mandolin builders are better at building archtop guitars than archtop guitar builders. I'm not sure, but I'm getting. It's a secret for Steve and I. I'm doing about one archtop guitar with each batch of mandolins. So, but it goes in phases. You know, there was a year and a half where I had a mandola order with every batch, and then you don't have one for a year or so, and things, they come in and out of being of interest to people.
Yeah, I do one big batch a year now. I have been doing it for a long time. And that batch can be between 12 and 18 instruments. 12 is a lot better than 18. But for a long time, I was doing that size batch, 12 in a batch, 3 batches a year. When I was back ordered like about 100 instruments all the time. That was just, it's what I call my crazy period.
You were back ordered 100 years, weren't you?
Yeah, basically. I was back ordered 6 years at one point. And I was building about 36 instruments a year, it was, or 30, it was just crazy. Things just, so I stopped that as soon as I could, because it's not good for your health. It's, for one person, like I've had at times where I've had an apprentice, and I've had 3 apprentices individually over those particular years. But it was kind of like the sorcerer's apprentice. They'd be helping making parts and using some jigs and that, stockpiling up parts. But the real work in making instruments isn't so much making the parts; it's all the assembling and all the final finishing. And to that many instruments, it's just crazy for one person to try and do that. But I did it for a long time. But I do work in batches because I really think it's important for the way I work to be able to compare the instruments all the way through the processes. All those little microprocessors, they're all competing for each other's attention all the time, as far as getting the quality up. And if there's one sort of featuring something in a batch, you got them all there. You can A and B them all together at the one time and try and bring the rest of them up to that same level. That's what I really enjoy about doing them in those sort of numbers at one at a time. Plus, it's more efficient as well, I find. So, and delivery, shipping from Australia is getting increasingly difficult. So to be able to just deliver them all at once and get all that process done.
Do y'all ever think about giving it up?
What did you say?
I figured there'd be something along that line.
Well,
be an IT consultant at Facebook, and then I'm out of here.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, man, instrument making generally is something I think you can pretty well do till people don't want your work anymore.
Yeah.
Which is going to come. Let's be honest, brutally honest. It's coming. But my real inspiration is Stradivarius. Antonio Stradivari. I mean, he lived till 93. He had 2 sons, one really productive son, Francesco, I guess, who was kind of his CNC machine of the time. But Antonio, his golden period between 1700 and 1720 he's in his 60s and 70s and early 80s. I mean, he was peaking at that time. The last 15 years, maybe not so good. They rolled off until he passed away when he was 93. But he was peaking at my age. So that's a pretty good inspiration.
Are you peaking?
Well, I always hope that the next instrument's going to be.
A little correction. Stradivari had 3 sons, and 2 of them helped him, and the other one got left out of the will.
Yeah, right.
And rightly so.
Right.
You what?
My
Paolo
son.
Francesco Ono Bono.
There's the fella that does all the work.
Yeah, Daniel.
Suatico.
Well, what do you expect to be doing, say, in the next 5 years?
Oh,
Working out how to get instruments to the States without a dilemma, like I've been doing for the last 40 years.
I mean, something reasonable.
Oh, okay.
well, actually, I've got a CNC machine that's pretty scary. It just scares me. It sort of growls at me when I walk into the room and look at it. I'd really like to get a lot more comfortable with that, to rebuild all my jigs with it, because all my jigs are worn out, all my molds, and I'm adjusting them all the time. I need to spend some serious time with this machine to really help me in that department. I think that would be a really good long-term investment if I can spend a bit of time with that and to really tighten up all my tool, my jigs and fixtures. That'd be fun. That's the next big challenge. And then sail off into the sunset building instruments till they put me in a box.
A curly maple box, I guess.
Curly maple box.
Paul?
Well, I think it's just to keep developing, keep trying to attune the eye and the ear.
Yeah.
Because it's just an ongoing thing, you know. People keep saying, well, when did you reckon you really hit your straps and you were building this, you know, your best instrument? It just never happens. All I ever seem to do to myself is criticize myself more, because I keep seeing more things that I want to try and tighten up. So I think it's just to keep developing, keep building, and keep producing. I see also a lot of it. I see a way of creating a bit of a legacy. I don't know if that's a pompous thing to say or not, but I like the idea that when I'm long gone, there might be someone who picks one up, you know, a long way down the track and go, who was this guy? What's happening here? And sounds all right, you know, and it's still there annoying people while I'm long gone. So I suppose just to keep the same thing. I mean, superannuation, I have superannuation, but unfortunately you've got to retire before you can get at it properly. But I don't ever see myself as retiring. What else am I going to do? There's pros and cons about your passion being your work. One is you can never escape it. That can be difficult at times and it can be stressful. But one of the joys of it is I hear a lot of people talking about they can't wait till they retire and they can do what they want to do and stuff. And I just, I don't ever see myself as retiring. There's too much to try and get my head around still. There's too much adventure out there. That joy of going and, you know, finding the wood and meeting someone or coming across something that's amazing. There's too much of that to do. That's the exciting thing. Going to Monroe Camp, you know, that's exciting. I love it. You're catching up with everyone. You're seeing instruments. You're going and visiting a wood supplier afterwards or before. You're seeing, you know, the people in the community of building. All of you folks getting to see you folks, which has killed me the last couple of years not being able to come. You know, that is the joy of this particular work, is that the life that it creates. You know, it's incredibly, like Steve said, it's an incredible privilege to be able to do this and to make a living. One of the things I was fairly proud of is that I've been able to get by. You know, my car's 18 years old, but I don't really want a brand new car. You know, I can pay the mortgage and I can get by and play music and build my instruments and just have a great community of people who you get to see and to catch up with, and you know, it's different, and there's no more fun than writing luthier as your occupation on different documents that you come across now and watch people put a quizzical expression on their face and go, what's that? Then
Less and less people are more.
Well, I've always found it refreshing, with the two of you, that being as accomplished as you are, usually you answer questions right straight out and as much detail. You listen and you give careful answers to people who are builders who don't usually have as much cred as y'all do, and certainly is not as much experience building. I remember hearing Will Kimball say one time that Stephen, you were approached by a well-known builder and was grilling you a bunch of questions trying to find out some information, and Will this just kills me. Will asked you, weren't you afraid to give him all those answers? And you said, no, I'll tell him anything he wants to know. And then you paused and said he wasn't asking the right questions anyway.
The competition as an independent luthier isn't the other competition. It's the competition is yourself.
Yeah.
That struggle to develop your own awareness, your own skills, is a personal struggle that goes on for your whole life, your whole career. So, sharing it with other people, it only helps validate what you're doing, because getting feedback from how other people do approach the same thing is a real important learning tool for yourself. So sharing information, knowledge generally just increases the pool for everybody. And
this is
why
going to
wouldn't
make
you do
you
that?
squirm a little bit, Steve. This is going to make you squirm a little bit, but there are certain times through my building career or experience that you've said particular things, and I've just stood back, and you're a bit the same, Mike, and I go, shit, that's really, really interesting and really important. I think, Steve, once you told me there's a big difference in being able to know how something's done and being able to do it.
Yeah.
So why hide the information? There is no value. As you said, the community gets richer by sharing information, and the dark, mysterious arts that secret luthiers business, it's just hilarious. Being pragmatic is going to get you a lot further than being deep and dark and mysterious about particular things. Yeah, I know how an internal combustion engine works, but I couldn't make one.
Yep.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
Go ahead.
Well, exactly. I mean, have great conversations with. I really enjoy talking with other luthiers, and like Mike Chemnitzer is a great example. He's a really thoughtful fellow about answering the same, what we're talking about. He'll really think deeply about it, and again, totally open. I mean, there's no reason why you wouldn't do that. So it really helps you think deeper yourself about what you're doing, because like exactly what Paul said, the information is there. There's no secret about the information.
Especially now.
Yeah, exactly. It's the way you interpret it, and the way you respond to it, and and the way you use that knowledge is just an individual challenge all the time. Yeah.
Get that boy to work.
Would you guys answer some questions from the guests?
Love to.
I think I have a little note here that says James has his hand up.
Yeah, I've got my hand up.
Mr. Ham.
Well, a bit of a technical question. About fret spacing. Do you guys use 12/2, or I know Don McCrosty has a system that compensates differently for amount of strings. I'm just curious about what different people are doing there.
Yeah, I just use standard scale measurements. I used to experiment with slightly stretched scales, as you find in a lot of laws. There was a period of laws where they had a slightly stretched scale in the first position, and they often don't play in tune. Because a setup on an instrument and scale length is a part of that, is kind of in the middle of the road. It's because depending on what the string gauge is going to be, what the action is going to be, it's going to change slightly depending on that. So just a standard scale is what I use. I don't adjust it anymore, or try to. I think it's kind of a can of worms, I think, because...
Well, it is a can of worms because there's no such thing as perfect.
Yes, exactly. So it's a tempered scale. It's a tempered
Equal
scale.
temperament is imperfect.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of, I mean, piano tuners, I guess they've trained deeply with that, how to make everything perfectly out of tune, so you can't pick it. So
The best you can ever do is equally almost in tune.
yeah, that's right.
And that can drive people crazy. That I don't think you need to chase it. You know, if especially if you're trying to emulate a particular instrument, why go? If it's working, why spend a lot of time changing something that's created history if it's working?
George, are you muted? You're muted, brother. George, can't hear you. Go outside and yell real loud.
Oh, hey.
Face the south when you yell.
Heidi, George is talking up a storm and can't nobody hear a peep.
Hold on, let me get to a different view. There's George Del Porto.
Yes.
George, I don't have you muted.
He's not.
I think that's your computer. No. Can you type in your question? Not muted.
And if your finger gets tired, use the other one.
Yeah. All right.
I say your mouth's a moving, but ain't nothing a coming out. Sound like something John Keith would say. I say, son. You guys watching American television? I'm sure you've seen Foghorn Leghorn.
He's my favorite.
I say.
Pay
The
attention.
boy's about as sharp as a pound of wet liver.
George, have you paid your cable?
Here we go. Here's the question. Do you find the wood or the particular way you build an instrument is most important in the final sound?
Combination, I would have thought. I mean, you've got to have the basic, the resource has to be right, obviously, to gain the final result. But what you do with that resource is obviously crucial as well. I would say it's a combination of what you can do. You could have less than perfect material and come up with an incredibly excellent sounding instrument. You could have the best looking piece of maple in the world and completely destroy what you do with it.
Yeah, I think you can make good sounding instruments out of almost anything, but to make great sounding instruments, it's about selecting the most lively wood to begin with, that has that potential just built into the wood itself and the structure. That gives you the potential to build the greatest sounding instrument that bit of wood can possibly build, can possibly produce. So different bits of wood will have different tonal effects, but to me, that's kind of just their personality. As long as the wood is lively and you can build it so it's fully open, so the instrument is as loud as it can be and as clear as it can be, the different species of wood will just color that to a warmer sound or a brighter sound. But fundamentally, it's got to have that volume and that clarity and that openness. And that's, to me, it's about selecting the wood at the source to begin with.
George is asking about, do you have any thoughts on X-brace versus parallel bracing?
Well, parallel bracing will give you, will make the soundboard stiffer than an X-brace of the same mass. A stiffer soundboard will favour the mid-range more. An X-brace will make the top looser, which will favour the bass more. So X-bracing tends to give just a warmer foundation to the tone. It doesn't, it's not better or worse, it's not louder or quieter. It's just a fundamental foundation of a bit more warmth to an X-brace sound. But if you're building them a fully professional instrument, either one should be equally as loud and clear, but more mid-range with parallel bracing gives the effect of more carrying power of the sound over distance. Mid-range cuts through more, whereas X-brace tends to fall off and get covered off, particularly by other instruments like guitars and bass. So that's why a parallel brace with the stiffer red spruce works brilliantly as a professional, on stage cutting to a microphone, whereas picking up an X-brace can do that as well, but just A and Bing them together, there's going to be a fundamentally just a warmer, softer sound to an
People
X-brace.
often say they sound a little bit more woodier, which is always dumbfounded me. They're both made of wood, but I think for me, the X-brace seemed to be up there and at your face straight away. It either played in quicker or was there quicker, but the tone bar is there, but it tended to develop tonally for a longer period. And that's just sort of on what I'm building and the way they sound to me. Both of them love work. Both of them develop. The more work you can give them, the better they develop. But I agree with Steve, the X-brace is that sort of woodier, midier type of tone to it. But the tone bars will, to me, develop further and grow tonally.
Do you use, could you sort of equal those out by using different types of wood for the top?
Yeah, like to me, it's all about stiffness. It comes back to that. I mean, just the shape of the soundboard is really. I have a little rave on my website about this, but the basic shape of an F-hole instrument is long, triangular shape between that, like a violin. It's the emphasis is on a long, straight rectangle. And the parallel bars just increase that stiffness as well. So, sorry, I've forgotten the question. I've got carried away with myself.
Could you sort of correct? Correct is the right word. Could you?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I mean, red spruce is the stiffest of all spruces, so it's going to be fundamentally controlling that mid-range just by the fact of the species. It's stiffer. and this comes back to stiffness. More mid-range, the stiffer it is, the more mid-range it's going to produce. The looser you can make the top, softer bit of wood, Engelmann spruce or European spruce is kind of in between the two. You'll get a bit more complexity, a bit more bass response. Opening it up with X bracing increases that flexibility, emphasizing a bit more warmth and bottom end as well. So you can compensate. I mean, you can make a really bright sounding X-brace mandolin. You can make it just cut your head off if you make the braces too thick and use red spruce. It's going to be, you know, there's extremes. You can make extremes go either way when they don't naturally want it as well by overbuilding something. But by doing that, by getting a lot more mid-range, you're going to lose something. You're going to lose complexity. You're going to lose bottom end. There's a real balance. I find I try to make a real balance. Again, selecting the wood that's as lively as possible. You know it's going to work if you build it right. And you get those combinations right of the mass of the braces compared to the mass of the top, where it's just stiff enough where the brace starts to have an effect. You can get really, really interesting complexity with the species of the top and the type of bracing. That's what I really enjoy doing. I've been using a bit of selecting really stiff Italian spruce, which is really, really similar to its weight and density and stiffness to American red spruce. Ironically, they call it red spruce in Italy, so Alberto Rosso. But that's really, it's got the same stiffness. This particular grade that I select has got the same stiffness as American red spruce, but it's a lot lighter in weight. So it's got that stiffness, but it doesn't have the same mass, the weight to it. And it has a real complexity. I find it really exciting building with. It's not exactly the same thing as building with Adirondack spruce, which has a real sound of its own. It's just, there are a few more colors on the palette you can play with when you start mixing with those things together.
And you've combined the X with Engelmann on some of the classical instruments, the C series, did you say?
Yeah, a lot of the instruments are built up until the 90s, the late 90s, were mostly all Engelmann spruce. A lot of them were Engelmann. And of course, I started doing the X-brace a long time before that to give that, again, ironically, trying to emulate the old laws, which were by then 60 years old, and they were really open. They had, really good warmth to them as well, the dry warmth to them. And I started doing X-brace to try and emulate some of that openness that they had, and that it worked initially. It worked beautifully. It gave a real big open sound. But going back using those harder woods and learning how to use them properly was a real challenge from the late 90s onwards, and learning how to carve red spruce. So it's really the typical law sound, but for me, I like to make it with a bit more warmth and a bit more color to it, and that's a real challenge. Getting a new instrument to have that strong mid-range, that strong projection, but with complexity on the bottom end is a real challenge. I find it's
without 90 years of playing put into it. They want it right now.
Yeah. And you don't want to try and make an instrument that, well, that's it. That's all you're going to get. That's you're going to get. You got to make an instrument where you have to be a bit patient with it and have to, develop the energy into it yourself and let that develop naturally. Like that's a really important thing. That's kind of the same philosophy I have against relicking instruments, making them look old to begin with.
You put the work into them to.
You got to earn it, I think, and it develops naturally the right way when you do that, I think.
There's no instant gratification with that.
Yes, sir.
And you know, the badges of honor that you put on your instruments that a lot of people worry about as a player are all part of the life and the character of the instrument. That's part of you working it. And one of the beauties about varnish is that when you are playing that, it actually it wears out, it wears thin, it changes in a specific way to the way you play. So it's almost like a signature. If you have an instrument from new and the neck, you know, you've played it and you've worked it, and the varnish is wearing thin in a particular area because your arm rests in a particular way, that is your signature on that instrument. It's something that's all part of the life of it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I agree totally. That's why we love those old instruments so much, because they wear history on their sleeve.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I just wipe on mine. I don't scratch.
He's called Mr. This is called Mr. Patina here, hosting your show.
Well, I don't. Do anybody else have some questions or comments?
Yes.
The old guy up in the corner is waving his hand.
Me, the old guy up in the corner. Yeah, I've got 100 questions, but
you can only have about 75.
Okay. I've been carving off just the lore information that I have, and I've been told that the thinner, go as thin as you possibly can, and your tone bar thickness on parallel bracing. I mean, I don't know what I'm doing exactly, but I'm on number 10. So what do you go for when you're, like Steve's talking about, lively? How do you, when you're picking out your wood? I pick out my own maple particularly, not the spruce, but what are you looking for in the lumberyard when you're knocking on it? Are you changing the lore dimensions? How do you get to that? I don't know. How do you get them good? I don't know.
Well, in the lumberyard, you're tapping and just listening for resonance, for liveliness, and it's not going to ring like when you tap a plate that you've been carving. There's a different sound to that, and also it's context of the situation. If you have 20 in front of you, then that's going to be the standard is set by the most lively of the 20. You don't carry around a billet that you really love and want to base everything off. So your experience of listening to what you're tapping and how it sounds, but you're often going to be faced with a situation of, here's what I have in front of me. Now, out of these ones, I'm going to select that. So that's your basic resource, is looking for the liveliest in the lumberyard.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. I mean, lumberyards is not the best place to buy tone woods.
The sound of a buzzer.
The best place to buy tone wood for musical instruments is by a musical instrument woodcutter who cuts for the instrument you're trying to make. So you're buying billets, you're buying wedges, like for tops and backs. They're roughly they're going to be the same size. So you can go, and I really recommend you going there and just developing a friendship with the dealer, with the person who's cutting the wood, and getting their trust, letting you just have a few hours with the pile of wood, and just go through each one, go through 100, because I'll have 100, I'll have thousands if they're any good at what they're doing, and just start high grading off, which is just when you hold a piece of spruce or maple, there's a point, it's called a node point, where it doesn't vibrate. It's about that far down, and when you tap it, it'll ring like a bell when you're holding in the nodal point that's not vibrating. And just do that to every piece, and every piece will start ringing like a bell. And put the loudest bells aside, and just high grade off, and they'll be telling you, I'm the loudest, I'm the most lively. And then and then you walk home with, say, 10 tops or 10 backs or 2 that you know of all the 100 or the 50 that you've gone through, you know that they're the best ones. So you know you're going home with great material. The rest is up to you. And as far as carving red spruce, there's a little window, like when you start carving a top, the frequency's up here. It's really high frequency because it's too thick. It's going to ring really high. And so the more you carve it down, that frequency comes down. And it comes down to a little window. And that window, I always think, if you're somewhere in that window, it's a range of about 3 or 4 notes, tones, where you'll get a really good sounding instrument. Above that window, they'll be too bright. There's too much wood. It's going to be thin. It's going to be hard sort of sound. You get the window, anywhere in that window, it's going to sound pretty damn good. You go below that window, it becomes not enough mass. It becomes muddy and dull. You lose that clarity. Up here, you got heaps of clarity. That's all you got. In the window, you got clarity. You got complexity of tone. You got volume. You got everything. But you drop below that, you get volume, but it becomes more and more muddy the further you go away from it. And that depends on, every bit of wood is going to be slightly different in thickness to reach that same window. And my window,
that window has got that. That's where you want to get that building of the mid-range, Steve. You know, that foundation, that getting the mid-range strong, and everyone will find it in their own particular way. So for me, I'm really always thinking about getting in the first sort of early time of it being strung up, that point from the open D string up to the G being big and round and fat. And for me, that mid-range provides a foundation for all of the other tonal aspects of the instrument to build upon, and they all come to it. But getting that mid-range, you are on that road to getting a balanced sounding instrument, and the warmth, and then clarity comes in and all that sort of, so that sort of carving is really important to get it within that particular tonal range.
So the tap tuning to it, carving to a pitch, all that stuff, that's not science. That's more of an art. It's not mathematically.
You know what? I think that it's interesting. I'm always intrigued by a lot of folks who have articles or YouTube clips, and they've got like a workshop that's like a German vaccine laboratory. It's perfectly clean, and they've got some oscilloscope noise-making machine, and they're hitting a particular note, and they must make one instrument a year, and they're going to a particular note. I think it's almost like, to me, there are 2 types of tap tuning. You can tap tune to try and achieve a note. You can tap tune to try and achieve the most response you can from a top plate or a back plate. Both will work. Both will end up with a good sounding instrument, a powerful instrument. They don't all. You might have a goal with one particular thing to achieve a note, and it never comes. But the top is so responsive; it's really working. And for me, and you find if you're following that, it's going to be around about the same note. I want to emphasize that D range around about that for the tops. It doesn't always go to exactly the D note for me. And I think you can get a lot of time spent tapping and a little whittle here. Then things change when tone bars go on and you're manipulating again. So you'll want to get the amount of response you can from the top.
Yeah, it's total science. It's all about the mathematics, really. But if you, like Paul said, if you try and analyze that and quantify that, you might go a bit crazy. I mean, because it's going to change a little bit. Every piece of spruce is going to be different. I tell you what, a really good ballpark is the spec sheet that was designed for the original Lloyd Law mandolin in 1922. I think I have a copy of it on my website, and it gives the specs of how thick the spruce. First of all, you should choose the best, finest grain, no more than 14 lines grains per inch of West Virginia Adirondack spruce. That's what it says in just a typed sheet, 2 pages type sheet. This is original law specs. And then it gives the thickness of the top in the middle and the thickness of the top at the recurve area about 1 inch in from the sides. It gives the thickness of the back at the middle and graduating out to the recurve area. And that's what was given to the people carving the instruments. So if you stick within that range, using red spruce or any spruce, really, you're going to get a pretty good sounding mandolin. It's just how well you do everything else. And if you stick to your braces at the thickest point, about 1/4 inch square with a rectangular section of it, making rectangular braces about 1/4 inch wide and about 1/4 inch deep to 3/16, I should say, 1/4 inch wide, 3/16 thick. That's basically the cross section of my braces. And then the tops and the backs will vary a little bit depending on the density of the particular piece of wood. But those specs on that original spec sheet, you can't really go too far wrong with that.
You've got all the information. You can do it exactly like that with no experience at all. And then you basically, you're setting a baseline for yourself. So if you've built using those specs and you've got a product you've come up with, then if you do a few, then you might go, okay, well, how can I perhaps vary this either way? Or maybe I'm feeling more response if I carve out just a little more here and there. And you've got a perfect foundation with those specs because you know what works and you can vary it from that.
Yeah. And another really important thing, I think, if you really want to make instruments, of more than just a couple, keep records. Keep really good records of what before the box was assembled, when the top was carved, when the back was carved. Just write down what the frequency were, what the note was that they were tapping to, of the top and the back. And then when the top and back gets closed into with the sides, when the box gets put together, the air frequency, that's captured inside will have a frequency. And by blowing across it like a top of a bottle, you can determine what that is, and just write that down as well. And the more instruments you make, and when you string the instrument up, just make a comment about what you think the sound sounded like. Just have a little comment associated with that number of instrument. The more you do that, initially you can't see the forest for the trees because it's just, wow, I don't know, it just sounds all right. But the more you make instruments and you start to see what your comments were, and the comments for the best sounding ones, there's a pattern starts to appear, what your frequencies are. And it's a really good guide just to reassure yourself that you're kind of on the right track. And you know that you can't go too far out of that range. That little window is important. But those spec sheets, I think Charlie Derrington sent me that years ago when he first went back to work for Gibson. He was digging through all the old files and he got out he found that type spec sheet and he sent it to me. So it's on my website. It's there. Just have a look at that. And there's nothing magic about those numbers. But
I'm looking now. Where on your website is it?
I think it's in the I have a restoration section where I just document some of the laws I've restored.
Okay, I see restoration.
And I think it's on the first law, the June 1st, 1922, that I restored a few years ago. I think it's on that page.
It's right next to the lingerie page.
Okay. Yeah, I'm on the lingerie right now.
That's been a huge seller. That's been a huge seller.
Yeah, it's the wood butcher budgie smugglers.
Yeah. Now that's sporting wear. That's different.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was the
I'm
swimsuit.
glad not everybody knows what budgie smugglers are.
Yeah, me too.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, I
think
know
it-
them. I think I try and keep it that way.
I think it's the June. I think it's the June 1, the June 1st, 1922 restoration page.
Steve, can I ask you a question? Have you had a chance to play that since you've done that restoration? And if you have, how's it developed? What's happened tonally and
Well, I don't know. I have played it a couple of times. The owner, if he knows I'm coming to Nashville, he'll bring it. He'll drive it over and we'll have a little catch up with it, which is fun.
Yeah.
No, it's good. It's that instrument. It had well, it had the tone. The sound was there completely.
Yeah.
Except
Yeah.
the top was flapping around. So you knew it. You knew it was really open. It was clear. It had really good. Actually, Dog played it when I first got it before I took it home to restore it. And there's a video of him playing it.
yeah.
And of course,
It
Dog
kept
could,
sinking, the top kept sinking, didn't it, as he tuned it up or something?
yeah. Well, it was slightly tuned down a little bit because it was the
Right.
top. You tune up the pitch. We tuned it up to pitch for a little while because it wasn't strung up. We tuned it up to pitch, and you can see sort of light sort of coming through the top a little bit. But he got it like Dog does. He gets a great tone out of it.
Yeah.
With the top split in half.
Yeah.
But what the restoration did was just it brought all that solid mid-range back to it. The clarity, it brought the clarity back is what it was missing before. It's kind of muddy. It was loud. It was law. It sounded like a law that was sort of played underwater a bit. It was muddy, dull sound, but it was great volume. But the restoration brought that clarity back really nicely. And the last couple of times I played it, it's great. Gee, it's good mandolin.
Yeah, that was great work, Steve. It was really wonderful to see that thing back in action. You did a great job on that.
Thank you. That was a mandolin with everybody had seen that the condition for years. My whole life I've seen that photo of that Darrell Wolfe took years and years ago.
Yeah.
And my God,
It's incredibly interesting, though. Just interesting parts of it. That you could see little bits of F4 ideas still in their heads, with binding and color and everything. It was just amazing to see.
Yeah, the little volute at the back of the heel button on the back. Kind of bit of a bigger neck, more of an F4 sort of. It was not an F4 width, but it had that bulk, more of a triangular, bulky feel to the neck. And the bracing was interesting. It was only slightly different bracing on it as well. It wasn't just an even graduation of the bracing. It was real like a violin. It'd come up and then just drop off suddenly. It's a few interesting things in it. It was fun to work on.
The over-engineered pick guard bracket.
Yeah.
A hole through the top and then a hole through the side.
like Gibson always used to say in their old catalogs, staunch rigidity.
Well, they didn't know what an F5 looked like yet.
Yeah. Yeah, they were making it up as they went, which is good.
Do you reckon there was another one in there, Steve? They've said there was another number there.
I can't say, but I've had an interesting bit of information recently that I don't know whether it's real or not, but there's evidence maybe of another one. And there's a pick guard of the same specs, just a single bound pick guard of 2 numbers before that original one. So, but it's the scratched on serial number on the underside of the pick guard, which means nothing, but it's kind of a curious little teaser there. Yeah. But I have information maybe that come to light that there may be another one around, but I don't know. I can't confirm or deny
This is the
that.
exciting thing of being a builder. All of these, there's always really interesting teasing information about instruments out there that just get you excited. You know, that's one of the joys of it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if you look at the serial number lists, there are a lot of gaps still. And there are a lot of instruments under beds and in closets that won't see the light of day, and until people pass away or whatever, house auctions, yard sales, or whatever. Yeah. But there are a lot of gaps in the serial numbers. So most of them are probably all the overhaul models that were still made around that time, F4s and below, but there are potential for those numbers to be F5s. So keep looking, folks.
Yeah, and call us immediately.
Well, it seems like there's something shows up every once in a while that says previously unknown.
Yeah. And I mean, it's easy to say, well, there are some frauds out there, but counterfeit instruments are so obvious if you know what you're looking for. They're, like Paul alluded to initially, there are so many different little things that are just particular to an instrument, the maker, the way they did things, the era that the time, the age, that you just can't fake. No matter how good you are, you just can't do it. So, there are fakes here, but they have like a big red dot on them. They're just so obvious. Because it's kind of like a hurdles. Is you only have to trip one thing, then the whole thing falls down. Because once there's a query about something, when you start looking, well, yeah, obviously it all falls over. So inside. Outside and inside. Inside is where the real, where the real evidence is.
Stuff. Yeah.
Does anybody else have a question? I think John's asleep. No, John Keys.
He was in that big chair.
Well, we're closing in on.
Comfortable.
We're closing in on 2 hours. I don't know what everybody's doing. I think probably, I guess my next question was going to be, what are you guys going to have for lunch? Because it's getting to be lunchtime where you are. Steve's probably looking for a smoko about now.
I had an early smoko before. Smoko down here is morning coffee break.
Yeah.
Like on a building site, they'd have it.
Yeah,
smoko and a cup of tea.
It's from an earlier time. We do less of the smoke, more of the code.
Well, I don't know. I think it's reasonably evident that we all love what you do, and we love your work ethic and your dedication, certainly, to excellence, and it's a rare thing. I think I love your work ethic as much as I love your instruments, and the enduring friendship aside, I think you guys have contributed a huge amount of knowledge and quality sound to this thing that all the rest of us are pursuing, and without you, it would get pretty lonesome sometimes. So I really appreciate what you do, and I appreciate the both of you quite a bit. And it's obvious that these people do too, or they wouldn't have sat here for 2 hours.
Well, thank you, Hoss. It's all about what you do. I mean, that's where it all comes from. It all comes from the music. There's no instrument making without the passion behind it, which is the music.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Heidi has written something here. Heidi, I'll hush if you want to say something.
Oh, no, it's been an amazing, listening to Paul and Steve, you guys going back and forth, and it's this deep insight knowledge and kind of geeking out on just all of what you do and the insights and the passion and the years of everything. And I was just texting everybody. We usually do a tune of the month was Southern Flavor, and I know, Paul, you do that one real well. And I just said we're just going to pass on playing that as a group tonight, and we'll do that next time. So that was my message to the group, but that's all. But it's been enlightening for me to be able to listen to this as well. So.
Well, I agree with Steve totally that, you know, the real inspiration of the build is hearing the result. And I know I said it at the last mandolin camp, Mike, but hearing you play inspires me every day. And it inspires me in a way that you can hear what this little box can do if you at least get on the path to trying to do it right and trying to get the best you can out of a box. Because God knows I'll never hear it from my playing, so I'm really glad that you can do it.
Well, if you heard me every day, you'd change your mind about that. Oh my. Well, I think it all goes hand in hand. We all need each other, and being stuck at home has proven that over and over and in spades. We all need each other, and nobody can go at it alone.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah, yeah. But we're stuck in the workshop all the time alone.
As you said, Steve, social isolation and wearing a mask, no different.
Yeah. Job description. Yeah.
Well, that's self-imposed. That's because you're nuts.
And thanks, Mike and Heidi. That was wonderful. And thanks, Paul. It's great to see you. Don't see you very often.
Hopefully we'll catch up again soon, Steve.
Yeah.
Well, come see us if you can. And as soon as they'll open up the borders, I'm going to come down.
Well, I hope so.
Come on down.
And see if we can get the rest of this bunch to go with us.
Yeah, I'll call Line Burners in Albany and we'll have them set up.
All right. Get them to make a barrel just for us.
I will.
All right.
Mando Camp Down Under.
Yes. Yeah.
Mando Camp Down Under.
Okay. All right.
On the list.
Well, good night, folks.
All right, everybody. The next one is December 15th. And I will be sending out the newsletter actually on December 1st this time. So, and we're getting ready to announce next year, which is the dates. So our dates had to be moved from September 14th through the 18th. We moved them to September 28th to October 2nd, because in Bristol, there is the NASCAR weekend of the year. And apparently NASCAR contracts the hotels 3 years in advance. So I could not get
are more important than NASCAR?
Well, Bristol Rhythm and Roots, NASCAR changed their week this year. So Bristol Rhythm and Roots had to change their week because they just can't handle it. But with that said, it hasn't been announced, but we have something set up with the Carterfold, as well as the birthplace of country music in Bristol.
At the museum.
So at the museum, and doing a live broadcast and a radio show, and maybe the pig roast there. So
and I happen to know that there's a really nice mural on the whole side of a building where we could have our photo made.
Yeah.
Great. So that's all in the works and that'll be announced soon, but that's the reason why the camp got pushed back 2 weeks.
We have 2 members of the bluegrass community. Butch Robbins probably going to do some talking on early bluegrass, and I think I'm not official, but he has said he would. Doyle Lawson is going to come because he lives close and talk about his time in the business. He told me that in the beginning he tried to play like Bill and he couldn't do it to suit him, so he decided to do his own thing, which was news that I had never heard of before. So I found that to be very interesting. But it looks like Doyle's going to come out and talk too.
Right.
Yeah. So it's not officially released yet, but it will be soon. And thank you. Thanks everybody and Paul and Steve. This is so important for our participants and musicians to hear, and it's just been such a blessing having both of you share your experiences and what you do. So thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Great fun. Thank you.
Good
Thank
night.
you. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks,
Or good
everyone.
morning. Good afternoon. Good day.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.